Welcome to the launch of the History Bards podcast. And for those of you who listened in to our previous recordings from the Hisfic Chicky podcast, welcome back, and we are glad you're joining us. Today, we have the great privilege of featuring award-winning author Daniel Greene, whose historical books span the American Civil War era from Northern Wolf to Northern Shadows, the last of the series which we at the Historical Fiction Company had the honor to read and review. Whether it's a saber charge in the American Civil War or a gun battle between two rival bands surviving a hellish landscape, he is known for his ability to embed every page with fast-paced action, thrilling suspense, and gritty realism. He is an avid traveler and physical fitness enthusiast with a deep passion for history. The works of George R.R. Martin, Stephen Pressfield, Bernard Cornwell, and George Romero have inspired his work. Although he's a Midwesterner for life, he's lived in Virginia long enough to consider it home. Daniel's undeniable skills at telling an adventurous story, an adventure well driven by his design narrative and flair for historical accuracy and period detail, will be known to those who have made the journey with his hero in the previous books in this series. It will come as no surprise to them to find these skills as sharp and as well honed as ever. Thanks for being here, Daniel. How are you today?
Oh, I'm not doing too bad. Just in my writing cave down here in my office is in our basement of our house. So this is where I go to find just a little bit of quiet time.
Oh, that's great. Well, to start off with, since this interview is about you, can you tell us about your journey as a writer, who you are, and why you got into writing historical fiction?
Sure. So historical fiction wasn't my first genre that I wrote in. I wrote a post-apocalyptic, it's a zombie apocalypse series called the End Time Saga. And that was actually how I debuted as an author. And that first book came out, End Time came out in 2016. And that was the first time I published, but that wasn't my full-time job at the time. I was working part-time, or I wasn't working part-time. I was working full-time in another job, but it was part-time as a writer. And so I did that. I came out with End Time in 2016, and then the second book called The Breaking in 2017.
Okay.
And then the third book, the Rising, came out in 2018, and that was kind of like the tipping point for me, where I decided to go full time as an author. And since then, I have 5 books out and one novella in that series, and then I have the Northern Wolf series, which is what we're here to talk about. And there's 5 books in that series as well.
Okay.
And so I started writing Northern Wolf in 2019, and I finished that series in 2021. And I didn't come out with anything in 22, which is unusual for me because I am full time, partially because my wife and I had a child in 22.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
that's been I'm sorry, not 22. Wow, I'm gonna get beaten up for that one. We had a child in 2020.
Well, still congratulations.
So yeah, thank you. Yeah, he's 2 now, so it's been just a lot of fun being a parent and a father, and but that kind of slowed me down a little bit. And the other reason is I have another series that's coming out at the end of this year, so I've just been kind of working on that series in the background. So yeah.
Okay.
And so I was like, sure.
So can you tell us more about your books, the ones that we were talking about, the Northern Wolf series, and about
Sure.
the series itself?
Sure. So the Northern Wolf series follows a German immigrant, and his name is Johann Wolf, and he has a bum leg, and he swindles his way into the Army of the Potomac, and specifically into the Michigan Cavalry Brigade. Mm-hmm. And he is kind of forced into a company of undesirable recruits, under strength, and they kind of go out into the war, basically, and it follows their adventures and this kind of undesirable group of guys become kind of like the most daring raiders, Union raiders of the American Civil War.
Oh,
Obviously,
wow.
yeah, they're fictional, but it follows historically. It follows the Battle of Gettysburg. There was a infamous raid on Richmond, and then there's Yellow Tavern, the Battle of Yellow Tavern, in Trevilian Station, and then the Hunt for John Wilkes Booth is the last novel in that series, and that one kind of changes gears a little bit. It's kind of an end of war story, so that Northern Shadows is a little, it's different. The other ones are very battle and war focused, and then this
Right.
one's like, well, what do we do now, kind of, or what's happening now? And so
Mhm.
I thought it was really satisfying to write kind of like this ending chapter for all of these characters, and like,
Yeah.
well, what do we do now that we don't have a war to fight? And
Yeah.
like, who are we when this has become our lives for so long, and it impacted so many people? And so that's the Northern Wolf series. It's probably, as far as characters go, it's more Northern focused,
Okay.
more Union focused, but there's several Southern characters, or rebel characters that some are antagonists, some aren't, that show up throughout the series. And there's definitely some interest there too. If you enjoy the southern viewpoint of the war, I definitely explore. In particular, Wade Hampton is one of the General Wade Hampton, who's um, a, he may not be as well known as some of the other Southern
Mhm.
generals, but he was just a really interesting character to study and learn about as we went along.
Oh, well, that's really fascinating because, like, now you're talking to a Southerner. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I'm surrounded by different areas here where I live. Um, Andersonville is not too far from
Oh
me,
yeah,
and of course Atlanta. So I'm
yeah,
really close
yeah.
to
Absolutely.
Atlanta. But I'm sure you are too. You're surrounded by different areas where you live in Virginia.
Absolutely. So, as probably know, most of the Eastern Theater took place in Virginia of the Civil
Right.
War. And so, like, I'm literally surrounded like um by battlefields. Like, I have a
Right.
battlefield that's probably 2 miles from my house. And like, we go as a family, we go out to Manassas and just kind of walk the ground. It's a beautiful national park, but you can go walk the grounds. And
Wow.
so it's really nice to just be able to be outside and kind of
Yeah.
experience that history at the same time. Um, yeah, I don't, I know one of the things we are going to talk about is like going to see battlefields, and for
Yeah.
Virginia, like Manassas is close by, but Gettysburg is also close to where I live. I live in Northern
Right.
Virginia, so right outside of DC. So Gettysburg is only, I don't know, hour and a half, 2 hours away, two and a
Oh,
half hours,
that's
I don't know, something like that. And so it's that kind of dynamic, another one of those dynamic battlefields, and what many people consider the turning point of the Civil War
of
is,
course.
it's close enough for us to, spend the afternoon and go out and visit. And we've been there several times.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that was
yeah,
one of the questions I was going to ask you about traveling to
yeah,
different places because it's so
yeah,
fascinating to learn about these different places and to actually be there. It's
yeah,
and I don't know, as a writer, I don't know, you probably have experienced this. It just gives you a different sense, especially whenever you're trying to write about that era. So I don't, and I know you have to experience
yeah,
that too. We all do it.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a pretty good job of preservation as a country of those battlefields in particular.
Uh-huh.
Since my book focuses more on the cavalry engagements, which are
Right.
generally less covered because they're usually smaller than some of the other events. They tend to be very kind of off the beaten track, or off the beaten path, and you go out there, and I mean, it's like a little plaque somewhere where some of these things are
Right.
taking place. So I went and visited Todd's Tavern, which was kind of a part of the Wilderness Campaign, um, which is featured in the novel. I also went to, I mean, I've been to Gettysburg. So the main cavalry component of Gettysburg is called the Eastern Cavalry Fields, and
Mhm.
that is where Custer, after being in charge for, I think, less than 2 weeks of this brigade, he'd been starred general only for a couple weeks. He he led a successful defense against Jeb Stuart on the third day of the battle. But whenever since I was a kid, I've been going to these battlefields, and I don't know if maybe I was unusual growing up, but I was like, hey, mom and dad, let's go to battlefields for vacation, and they're like, okay, and that's kind of how I got interested in this as a kid and wanting to read more and learn more about the
Right.
different aspects. But all the times I had gone to Gettysburg, I had always missed the Eastern Cavalry fields because they're about 3 miles away from the main battlefield that you would probably tour on foot
Right.
or in a car. And so, but this last time I was able to get out there and go to it, and that was, that was kind of surreal too, because it was new to me, but it was also interesting to
Right.
be able to um, see this battlefield where, it's considered a minor clash, but it it kind of started, Custer's career per se
Right.
as a general. He'd been in the war, as a lower rank before that, but he, as we know, like his demise, led to his fame. But like he was a very interesting and questionably pretty good you know, civil war general. At least he was, at the very least, he led from the front, and no one can take that part away from him. His bravery,
Right.
maybe some of his
Absolutely.
actions would be questionable, but
Well,
he
then you've
definitely had
kind
that
of,
attribute of a leader, which was leading from the front.
yeah. So then you've kind of like given us an idea of why you got into writing this. Can you tell us a little bit more about why did you choose this particular era?
Well, like I said earlier, as a kid, I was interested in it, and like we would go, and I remember, like my parents taking me to several of these battlefields as a kid, and as I grew older, I wanted to learn more about it. I was very interested in history and American history, just because American history is so personal to us. I mean, I kind of
Right.
love all kinds of all history of everywhere. I like learning about all different things.
Yeah.
I'm really into medieval history as well, but this one was just more natural because I think we're surrounded by it and it's here,
Uh-huh.
and so or at least we're here where I live, and
Right.
I was a history major at college, and so I
Okay.
continued to study history, and I think that I've been a historian. Historian may have different definitions per se, right? But like I feel like I've kind of been a historian my whole life,
Uh-huh.
and so I saw when I was going to write historical fiction just seemed like a natural fit. Like I was already interested in learning about it. I was already interested in bringing these people to life. In some ways, writing about this German immigrant and other different immigrants and different people, different ground soldiers or what enlisted men of the war. I was able to give, and obviously they've wrote, many of these people have written diaries that their voices have been heard per se, but
Right.
I just wanted to, in a fictional light, bring these people together and give them all voices and bring them to life on page. And you have your dynamic characters, you have Custer and you have Lincoln and you have
Hmm.
Wade Hampton and Jeb. You have these people that are almost larger than life, and a lot of times they've been you know become like legendary in their own right because of how many the stories that have been told about them.
Yeah, of course.
But and so like they really pop already because their life story is interesting, or very
Yeah.
interesting, or very spun up. And so it was nice to be able to bring in some of these, especially that immigrant experience. And that's something that I really learned as I was writing the series was, and you could do a Google search and find this information out as well. But like it, it just the number of immigrants that fought in the American, and I say our, the American Civil War was
Hmm.
almost a quarter of the soldiers that fought in that war were immigrants.
Wow.
And then you talk about soldiers that had a parent that so like were first generation
Yeah.
Americans or half. And so now you're talking about half the people that fought in this war had very close ties to another nation or another group of people. And that's who fought this war in our country. And they're all, Americans.
Yeah.
It's just like when you put that out there, that's amazing. And to be able to bring some of these stories to life of that experience and like why what would compel somebody, what would compel a German immigrant to fight for one side or the other, or to be a part of it at all,
Yeah.
when it comes down to, because like what kind of stakes do you have in this? And it was fun to be able to bring that to life in the my protagonist experience.
Well, that's really fascinating. And that kind of goes along with what I was going to ask you about if you found anything obscure. like within your research.
Hmm.
Um, that's a very fascinating thing to be able to bring out in historical fiction, is when you find those little obscure little tidbits to bring out. And I think that's really fascinating because it teaches, whenever as historical fiction authors, we really have a chance to teach something
Hmm.
that somebody never knew about. And so I
Yeah.
think that's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah.
Um, so, like, from your own book, do you have a favorite line or passage that you really like?
Yeah. That's tough.
Is it?
I mean, there's certain sections where like you feel like the prose is really like just really spot on, and it just flows naturally. It's hard. It's also been a couple of years since I wrote in this series, so I have to
Okay,
kind of jog my memory. But the one that I enjoy is that in this war, death played the fiddle and the army danced to its tune. And so, it's kind of a play on another other famous, quote about death per se in war. But I think it has more meaning than that. I mean, the catastrophic loss of life during the American Civil War,
right,
it was is incredible, really, and that's in part because both sides are counted.
right.
You talk about like, oh, how many Americans died in World War II. Well, it's just America. It's just we're one nation that's fighting in that war. And this one,
Yeah,
everyone on either side is counted in this tally. And obviously, disease was much more prevalent
right.
in this war. So they're not all battlefield fatalities or injuries, but when I looked it up, it's over 600,000
Wow.
Americans died, which if you can, and the fun statistic or the the way to put it that really I think catches people is that if you combine the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Mexican War, Spanish American War, World War I, World War II, and the Korean War combined, that's still less than what happened in the Civil War. And
Really,
so
that's amazing.
yeah, and so when you think about it in that way, this is in not only did it impact our nation on several different levels, economically, socially, military, all these different levels that it impacted our nation. It also, like, the population and things like and that as well is catastrophic in
Right.
many ways, in the way in the impact on the American people. And so like it was a game. What I'm trying to say is, not only was it a game changer on all these different levels that you may study, social levels and in the economic, but like just in people's lives. Like, I
Yeah.
would be surprised if there were many people that didn't know somebody who passed or was wounded or was sick and got sent home.
Right.
So I think that that's a part of the reason why I picked this as the background for this particular story as well, is that it's very dynamic in our culture as
Hmm.
Americans. Um, I think that many people, myself included, have ancestors that they've been talked about or passed down,
Of
that
course.
so it
Yeah.
has extra meaning to us. Um, and I it just provides that brother versus brother, that civil conflict where
Hmm.
you're fighting people that are very much you know like you
Right.
speak the same language, we have the same government, like
Yeah.
like all these things that were and they may have different they may have differences, right? I mean, people all have differences,
Yeah.
regionally and otherwise, but like it is a civil, an uncivil conflict between brothers and family,
Right.
and it did divide families. And I think in my third book, Northern Blood, specifically talk about and Flora Stewart was married to Jeb Stewart, but she was the daughter of um, last name was Cook, and he was a general for the Union. So her father and Jeb Stewart's father-in-law was a Union general, and actually part of the reason why he got, I think it's Cook, hopefully it's Cook, otherwise somebody will get me on it. But um, they, but Stewart basically rode circles around him early on during the war, and basically knocked the the cavalry expert for the American army, and then the Union army, knocked him out of, like, he was kind of pushed into like a back, uh, I don't know, he was pushed into like an administrative role.
Right. Well,
So,
so
so
I'm sure writing about all of that was extremely difficult. I can, in writing about any war, whenever you're writing about the
right.
battle scenes and the relationships and the loss of life, it's a
Mhm.
very difficult thing. I'm sure you found that really challenging to do, to write about those kind of things.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I always have enjoyed reading books, war and battles and things like that. That's always been intriguing to me, that military history. Um, so like I kind of like tune in when they start talking about, troop movements and things like that,
Yeah,
because that's because I like that. But
yeah,
yeah, I think where you in historical fiction where you don't want to be reading like a battle synopsis, right? You
right.
also like it needs to be real stakes for real people.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think what I'm going for is showing those stakes at various levels of command, and like
right.
and also in leadership as well. Like when I ask these people to do this, what does that mean to me personally, but also to them and their families, and then all these actions and have rippling effects across people's lives. And I
Yeah,
think that's when we do historical fiction, that's we're bringing this personal element into the
of
war, into the
course.
battles, and I think um, that is really fulfilling as an author to be
It
able. I mean,
really,
that's part of the reason why. Otherwise, you would, maybe you would just be a historian, and you
yeah,
would really dive into like, you know,
the
the
details.
actual history, yeah,
Yeah.
part of it. But
I'm so with you on that. It really does personalize these people's lives whenever you're reading historical fiction, writing or reading historical fiction.
mhm.
It's one of the reasons why I love the genre and why I got into it so long ago. Um, because I love history anyway. So I think
Yeah,
most of us who are historical fiction authors, that's the
yeah,
reason we love
yeah.
history, but we don't want to be historians.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's a little more fun to be able to
Yeah,
make a story as opposed to
it sure
have to
is.
follow a historical record. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because I know a lot of readers would like to know this. How do you feel about reviews, and are there any good ones, like in particular, that have come out for your
Uh,
book?
well, so reviews are the way I kind of it varied throughout my career. It's varied throughout my career. They're a double-edged sword I look at.
Right.
In some ways they can be motivating, in some ways they can be
Yeah.
stinging, if you will.
Yeah.
I think as far as new writers go, I think that you like hyper focus on that a little bit. Maybe you don't, but I feel like
Yes.
most new writers probably do, because they're looking for that validation that wow, I am this good, or I did this right, or I touched somebody.
Yeah.
My work has had an impact on somebody's life. And but over time, I think you kind of your skin thickens a little bit, and
Right.
as you remove yourself a little bit from the project, as time goes on, you kind of get further away from that piece. You you kind of just take the feedback as you will, and I think too, like sometimes, again, like sometimes they can be stinging if you know what they're saying is true. Sometimes they can be stinging because somebody is just not being, just venting on you
Yeah.
and
You're
using,
right.
kind of just coming at you. And so like you have to kind of take both those with a grain of salt,
You really
and
do.
and learn where you can, because I think that at the heart of it, like you kind of know you if you read it, you read enough. If you're an author, you're going to read.
Yeah.
Over time, you're going to know like that was that was a good piece of my work. Maybe that one wasn't quite as good a piece of work as I am capable of.
Right.
I especially I think when you're coming out with your first book and your second book and your third book, and you're like, you're looking back on that, you're like, man, like I could have done that better, I could have done that better. But I mean, that's just your growth as a person and a writer. And so I think you have to be, have to be kind to yourself too, and be like, well, that was then and this is
Yeah.
now, and look at what I can do now too.
Yeah,
And so I
and like and looking back, I have done that so many times of looking back at like my early writings, and
yeah,
now it's like, what was I thinking? So
yeah,
we kind of do that to ourselves too, don't we?
sure. And then that's anything, and it's always, hindsight's 2020, and like, oh,
Yeah,
maybe I should have changed that character to be more like this or that. But like, you just that's just that work. You're on a new piece and that you're excited about and that you can't wait for people to read,
Yeah.
and you learn from those things too.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things that your skin kind of thickens over time, and you just kind of
It really
I
does.
think deep down you know how it, if it's going to resonate, and so on.
Yeah. And just like we've stated at the HFC review, the reviewer for Northern Shadows quoted his favorite line from the book, which is apropos to some of the modern issues facing people today. It says, regardless of which side comes to raise a white flag, anything worth fighting for would be lost, and the people of America may as well lay the general shroud atop their nation's coffin and bury the ideas of democracy and freedom deep within its hallowed and sovereign ground. Everything the Patriots had fought to create over 90 years past would be for naught, for it was no outside power that destroyed the American people, only the American people themselves, who could not lay their differences to rest. And in doing so, they snuffed out the idea of freedom for all men. Daniel set out to write a captivating and exciting adventure focusing upon a central character to whom his wide readership is well accustomed and within whom they have invested heavily, and in this he succeeds admirably. No fan of his could possibly be disappointed by this, his latest offering. This book is fast paced and tells an exciting story and fulfills the requirements of a genuine page turner. There are no disappointments to be found here in that respect. It is altogether admirable that Daniel Greene knows his readership so very well and is so ready and able to provide them with the object of their desires. Now we're going to take a small break for our sponsors. And while you're waiting, please be sure to click the subscribe button and also find the short link to purchase Daniel's books in the podcast description. We are back with Daniel Greene, author of the Northern Wolf series of books. Tell us, Daniel, now that we've learned some about your books, what advice would you give to your younger self, which is also advice for younger writers wanting to write historical fiction?
Well, that's a good question. I think it is. It's good to reflect on that too. What would you tell yourself now? I I think the one of the things for me personally is try to be patient.
Yeah,
Um, that's kind of a personal thing, but like I like to I like to be on a timetable. I like to have deadlines. I like to knock them out, and that's
yeah,
kind of how that's how what motivates me.
yeah,
Um, I think that for for a thing that really resonates with me personally is the line, do the work.
hmm,
You have to sit down and work on this craft every day. Like I write every
right,
single day. I'm working on editing or a rewrite or the actual first draft itself. And I every single day my butt's in my seat and I'm doing my work, and
yeah,
there's not really a choice, right? Like if especially if you're independently published, or even if you're not, like you have to be doing the work. And it depends on what you're going for with your work. If you're more of a hobby writer like that maybe you don't need to do that every day. But if this is something that you maybe want to make into a career, I
yeah,
would say like you have to be putting in that daily work to get
right,
better. And I think when you build that discipline and that habit, I think that you're more likely to reach the goals that you're trying to reach. I think another one I would say is you have to study the top people. People probably say this often. You have to study the top people in your genre. What are they
sure thing.
doing? What stylistically, what do they sound like? What are their conventions? What are of the genre that they're using, that you could benefit from as well. I'm also a big proponent of like the 10,000 hour rule, which is like it takes 10,000 hours to master some sort of actual like skill set. And I think writing is one of those things that you really do have to spend that time doing
Yeah,
that before you become kind of a master of your craft. And I think when you're doing it for a few hours every day, or 4 hours every day, or 8 hours every day, eventually you're going to hit that.
yeah,
It might take it everything to be good at something that's important takes a while.
right.
And
I
so
mean,
I think that
I've never heard that before. That's absolutely a great way of looking at it. To be able to get to that mark is that's so
Mhm.
true. That what great advice for anybody that's starting out in this genre or any, writing in
Yep.
any field. So I
Yeah.
think that's really great. So we're kind of wrapping up now. So we would love to know what you have coming up.
So so I have a historical fantasy that I'm going to be coming out with the fall. There's
Oh,
not an
great.
official date yet. The thing is, it's going to be under a different pen name.
Okay.
So you might be my face, but different name. And so I have a trilogy that'll be coming out then. And before that, I have a novella that'll be released.
Okay.
And I'm really excited about this historical fantasy. It takes place in the Crusades. I like to think of it as, like Assassin's Creed meets like King Arthur
Oh, wow.
with supernatural elements in the Crusades. Like it's a lot of fun. I think if you like historical fiction, and you're really gonna like this. And if you like any kind of King Arthur or Knights of the Round Table or
I
any
do.
and with then I think that you'll enjoy it as well as like any kind of regular fantasy. It's not like hard fantasy where but it's I think that people are really going to enjoy it, and
Oh,
I'm really
that's
excited to get
exciting.
it. I've been working on it for a while, so I'm just ready to unleash it. I'm on the third book right now in the trilogy.
Great.
I'm
That's
going to wrap that
great.
up hopefully. But and then in June I'm going to be at the Fredericksburg Independent Book Festival, which
Okay.
is one I try to do every year. They are it's a small festival, but it's in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and it's a great spot to meet some indie authors.
Okay. Well, we'll be sure and put that on our website whenever it gets closer to that. We'll make sure and tell people about that event so that they can come out there and meet you.
Yeah, sure.
All
I'd
right.
love it.
Sounds good. Well, you know what? We really appreciate you being on the show and all of the questions, and we're looking forward to your upcoming books. And for all the fans listening in, you can learn more about Daniel and his books at www.danielgreenebooks.com, and that is with an E, and you can find the link in today's episode description. Also, the new issue of the magazine Historical Times featuring the Byzantine era has a spotlight article from Daniel on the fall of the Varangian Guard. And I hope I said that right.
That's
But you
good
can
enough for me.
and you can also find it on our websites at www.historicaltimes.org and www.thehistoricalfictioncompany.com. So we really appreciate everybody visiting today, listening in, and we're going to have some new content episodes that are coming up soon. Our next one that's coming out is going to be on the history of the Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina. And so that should be in the next couple of weeks. And as always, we would love for you to subscribe you can listen to the podcast on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, on Spreaker, and also we're going to be posting these on YouTube. So thank you so much, Daniel, for visiting us today. And great answers to the questions. And we are so looking forward to your books. And we're also going to put these up at the very end of this episode. You'll be able to see the covers to his books and the links to his books. So thank you for visiting us, and thanks to everybody at the listening in. This is Dee Marley at the History Bards, and we thank you to Daniel Greene.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
If you knew the fate of the princes in the tower, would you tell or forever keep the secret? Were the princes murdered by their uncle Richard III? Did Margaret Beaufort mastermind their disappearance to usher in the Tudor dynasty? Or did the young boys vanish for their own safety? Of anyone at the royal court, Elizabeth has the most to lose and the most to gain by keeping the secret the fate of the princes in the Tower. Inspired by England's most enduring historical mystery, Elizabeth St. John, blends her family history with known facts and centuries of speculation to create an intriguing story about what happened to the princes in the tower.